Hello everybody, Ron Wildman in again for former Macon Mayor C. Jack Ellis on Middle Georgia Spotlight. And our guest today will be the longtime city attorney of Warner Robins, Jim Elliott.
Hey Ron.
Good to have you with us, Jim.
Nice to be here, thank you.
Should we express full disclosure? You know, like they say, Jim is my son-in-law, but he's not going to get any special breaks from me today.
That's been true for a long time, right?
Yes. You've been there a long time. What? How many years now?
So I started my 35th year. I've completed 34 years of service to the city of Warner Robins.
You have any idea when you're going to try to make 50?
Absolutely not. I don't have any idea. It's the million-dollar question I get asked a lot. You know, how much longer are you going to do this? So we'll see.
You know, I think of course, city attorney, but the attorney business in general, and you're involved with Mercer's School of Law.
Yes. I teach as an adjunct professor at the law school. In spring semester of every year, this is my 14th year of teaching.
Now, what about the attorney business? Is it in good shape, or is it a healthy business to be in, or how do you look at that?
It's a healthy business to be in. I think the law's become very specialized anymore, so I think the days of a young law student or a young law graduate just hanging out his or her shingle, as they say, and taking whatever comes in the door is kind of over, because it's very difficult to do estate work and criminal defense and divorces and adoptions and real estate. Those are all, very specialized areas. And so I think students are having to kind of select a certain track.
I always thought of attorney having a degree, it opens so many doors for you in all sorts of businesses. Every business has to deal with the law, don't they?
Definitely does. And I've always often said to high school and college students, it's a great education, even if someone chose not to ever, quote, practice law, but they just went to law school for the education. It's invaluable in the business world and entertainment and journalism. I think it'd be helpful in a lot of different areas.
And you don't even have to be a lawyer out there in that world.
That's right. You wouldn't.
Having that background is extremely helpful. What portion of the legal education do you deal with over at Mercer? What do you teach?
So I teach local government law, which is kind of the discipline focused on city, county, school board, authority, governmental entities of that sort. So we learn a lot about some of the odd rules that apply in government context that don't apply in the private sector, like, if I can give an example, like agency. Most people would go to a mayor, and a mayor might say, I can commit to this or that. Well, the question really in the area of municipal law is, does the mayor have that authority to make a binding commitment, or must the mayor go to the city council or the commission or whomever to get permission to do so? So there are a lot of different rules in this area, and I try to just sort of teach my students what those rules are and kind of how to be aware of them.
Now, in 35 years, you've, lack of a better term, broke in several mayors over the years.
I worked for 8 different mayors.
8 mayors.
During my career.
It started with good old Ralph Johnson, didn't it?
That's right. That's who appointed me.
Love Ralph.
Retired Air Force colonel who had then run the Chamber of Commerce in Warner Robins. He was elected and called and asked me if I was interested in the position, and I said, I didn't even take that class in school. I don't know much about that. He said, well, come on and we'll learn together. So we did.
How long were you out of school before you got the job?
About 2 years.
What did you do in that 2-year period?
I had just been engaged in a private practice of law, and again, I did a little bit of everything, and I'm kind of glad I did. I did some things that I don't frankly care to go back and do anymore, like divorces or DUI or criminal defense or some of those sorts of things. But it was a great exposure to kind of the full gamut of what the law involves, and I think it was helpful in my later career to have a little bit of working knowledge of a lot of different areas.
Along with your work at City Hall, I do know you help senior citizens from time to time with estates and things, do you?
Well, when you're back in your hometown,
yes,
and your parents have a lot of friends,
yeah,
they'll trust me to give them some advice. And so over the years, I've done, quite a bit of writing wills and powers of attorney and doing some estates for close family members or close friends. And
about wills, how important is a will?
Very much so. A will lets you determine how your estate is distributed, and if you don't have a will, then the state law prescribes how your estate is distributed, and that's usually not It's typically not offensive to people the way the state law mandates distribution, but it sometimes can leave spouses maybe having to share with children that they didn't intend to or didn't expect to. Sometimes it brings into distribution errors that people were not particularly close to. So I think having a will it's an inexpensive way to give yourself a lot of peace of mind.
You know who doesn't have one?
Let me guess who that might be.
I need to work on that, don't I?
You do. You need to find a lawyer to do that, right?
Do you know a good one?
I think I do.
Also, you do around the state educational things. I mean, what, a GMA?
Yeah.
Tell me some of that.
So, I mean, I guess, when you've been involved in a specific discipline of law for a long time, you develop a bit of an expertise, and I guess I have in some ways. And so probably for 20 plus years, I've been doing some training sessions for the Municipal Association, sometimes through the Carl Vinson Institute of Government at the University of Georgia, for some other governmental entities. So I do training on a variety of subjects, open meetings and open records in particular. I've started in the last probably 10 years doing a lot of training on what we call practices for successful meetings, where I train elected officials on Robert's Rules of Order, just some kind of general procedural and ways in which they can conduct meetings that are effective and set forth a good face for local government, so their citizens are proud of the way the meetings are held and conducted, because that can be a great source of embarrassment to a community when their elected officials are in a meeting either held up to ridicule or ridiculing one another. And so this course has been particularly helpful. It's required training for Georgia city elected officials to get a certification program that's sponsored by the Vinson Institute of Government.
How popular are these programs when you're out at the GMA or Carl Vinson? Are they well attended?
So I typically teach this program 4 times a year, and I have 60 to 100 participants in the classes, so they're pretty popular.
That's very popular, yeah. Open records is a huge thing, especially in the news media, which I was in a few years back. And does that create a lot of problems for you?
It doesn't create a lot of problems. It creates a lot of work for local government officials, and that's just part of, we accepted that's what the law provides for. Georgia's open records law is perceived as being one of the most liberal or
easiest,
I guess is what you might say, and the law has been amended several times during my career. Now it really provides that records are generally expected to be produced within 3 days of the request. And that means that people are having to set aside other work that they needed to do or intended to do to comply with that. We go through that a lot, particularly with regard to emails. Email communication has become so common in today's society, and a lot of people believe that that's going to be a treasure trove of officials talking about something or arguing about something. I will tell you that one local media person I've dealt with recently has expressed to me some disappointment that he's not finding much in his email requests. And I said, look, I've trained my folks pretty well. I tell them, if you don't want to see it on the news or in the newspaper, then don't put it in writing.
The same thing in the meeting. If you don't say it, well, it doesn't mean they don't report it.
Yeah.
Jim's very cooperative with the media. Over the years, you're kind of a go-to guy. And what's your philosophy on that in dealing with the media?
I think it's part of the job. I think we all have to have a healthy respect for each other and for the boundaries. But I'm proud to say that, for example, I have among my Facebook friends 15 or 20 journalists that have covered the city over my career. And I think the fact that we, at the end of the day, have remained friends of some sort, I think speaks well of the relationship that we had with people.
And what's your relationship with the people you work with at City Hall? Let's say mayors, for instance. How do you work with a new mayor that comes in there and really doesn't know too much about what's the inside stuff,
Sure. Well, I think, and I'm clearly now one of the most senior city employees. And so I think any mayor that comes in just really wants to kind of pick my brain and learn some of the history. I mean, any of a number of subjects that will come up, I'll say, oh, I remember when. I can give a background story. We had a city engineer that retired in Warner Robins a couple of years ago, and Walter had spent pretty much his entire career in that position. And even to this day, if there's a drainage problem or a roadway issue or whatever, we will contact him, because you just gain a lot of institutional knowledge when you're somewhere for a long time.
People tend to forget there's so much turnover in that municipal business or county business, it's a constant new bunch of folks in there. Because you've had turnovers of council, I know, in my recent memory of things. And
at some point, and I told you a minute ago that I've worked for 8 different mayors. At one point, I tried to determine how many council members I've worked with. I just lose count eventually. It's been a lot. We have six elected council members in Warner Robins, and there's been a lot of turnover in 34 years in those 6 seats.
As the city attorney, whose side are you on? The council side, department head side, or the mayor's side?
So I work for the mayor and the council members, and I don't choose sides between and among them. So
That's why you've been there for 35 years, you think?
I guess that's
one of the
right.
reasons.
One of the reasons, I think. And department heads are kind of ancillary clients, if you will, if you look at the attorney-client relationship. But really, I work for the institution, which is the city government, who is represented by the 7 elected officials that we have in Warner Robins.
So your advice, I know that they have conflicts from time to time, like council and the mayors and stuff. So how do you deal with something like that? I guess that's something you could teach in school, isn't it?
Probably not. So my personal approach to that is that I try very hard to always give very consistent advice to everybody, and I share my legal opinions with all 7 members of the body. So they're not opinion shopping from me, and I'm not giving differing opinions to different elected officials. And so far it's worked pretty well.
For a lot of people, that's hard to do, to stay.
It is, and it's funny, I think any of us that are engaged in representing a city or a county or any other governmental body, we don't ever want to become what we call Dr. No, you can't do that, no, you can't do this. So I think we try to accommodate a way to do what the elected officials want to do, because at the end of the day, it's their vision, it's their operation. We're there to give advice and counsel. There are times you have to just say, I don't believe this is lawful to proceed in this manner, but I'm very careful to let everybody know my opinion. Everybody shares equally in my opinion, and I think maybe that's been the key to my success.
Now, not Warner Robins, because you represent the council and the mayor, but are there some governments that have, like the council, have their own mayor? Their own counsel, their own lawyer, you mean?
Yeah. So, I think there are. I think there are some, but you even look at Atlanta, which is clearly the biggest city in our state, and the city attorney likewise has this sort of dual role of advising all the elected officials, and so I can't think of too many circumstances I'm aware of where mayors have separate legal counsel from the attorney that's there to represent the city. That possibly is true in some of the major metropolitan areas, but it's pretty common that the city attorney or the law department of a city gives advice to the entire operation.
Do you see? But there's nothing barring them to have their own personal attorney if they want.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
What is there any?
Probably the key is who's paying for the attorney, because if they're paying for the attorney themselves out of their own pocket, then certainly they can do whatever they want to.
Yeah. Do you? Warner Robins has grown so much since I've been here, and you're a lifelong resident of that community. And what do you see? I think haven't they outgrown Macon population-wise?
So I think the story that we all hear is that the Houston County population is a little bit greater than the Bibb County population now. That's the consensus of opinion.
That's amazing. Of course, Robins Air Force Base. How's the city's relationship with Robins, or how do you guys look at Robins legally and everything else?
So I guess over the years we have some legal issues that kind of cross over. In one example, that would be enlisted or active duty Air Force members can be, if they're charged with a crime, we can defer criminal prosecution on our side of the fence, if you will, to a courts martial. And so that happens sometimes, and sometimes we have pretty engaged dialogue with those folks, but probably more of our efforts are at a different level in the realm of economic development or whatever is good for the community that's going to be good for the base as well. So it's been interesting over the years to establish relationships with a lot of different generals and base commanders, and in my particular case, JAG officers, legal officers.
Well, like the city government, the turnover over there is constant all the time.
And, much like a mayor has his or her own agenda, then I think a base commander or a general has his or her own agenda as well. And so sometimes we'll work on a project for a couple of years with a new base commander, and then that commander leaves, and the new commanders, that's not as great a priority for them. Like mass transportation to the Air Force Base. You'll remember that several years ago there was a bus system that was created from Macon to transport people. That was a particular issue to a base commander at the time, later not deemed to be as important.
2 years later, it wasn't that important.
Nope. And it's gone.
Well, your office, I imagine, if anybody has any complaints with the city, your office is one of the first to get notification of them. What is the biggest thing out there you hear from the citizens?
We get lots of complaints, but our office in the Warner Robins City Hall is the point of contact for damage claims against the city. So we deal with a lot of motor vehicle accidents, slip and falls on sidewalks and in parks. Sewer backups is a particularly unpleasant thing for people, so we deal with all those kind of things. But pretty much any claim for damages is processed through our office. We don't make those determinations in all cases. The city participates in an insurance pool, and so a lot of times we are simply gathering information and forwarding it to an insurance adjuster, but we're typically the first point of contact with most of those kind of people. And then, we hear complaints about things the mayor and council are doing, or questions, maybe is more appropriate to say. They have questions about why things happened in a meeting or how they happened and those sorts of things. So we kind of field a pretty big gamut of issues across the spectrum.
I remember a few years back, in particular because your wife, Michelle, my daughter, worked with Donald Walker. When Donald came in, he wanted to expand the boundaries of the community. And of course, he had to have your help in set that up. Tell us the story of that, because the city has grown greatly over the years.
It's grown a lot. I think it's grown. I think I determined at some point in about 2010 that the city had doubled in size since I had taken my job in 1985.
Wow.
Went from about 17 square miles to over 36 today, I believe. And it was interesting to see how that all happened. And here, it was kind of a chess game, if you will. It really began with Mayor Ralph Johnson, who realized that the city was going to grow if it had an expanded utility system. So his big issue was to borrow the money and increase the capacity of the city's water and wastewater treatment system. Then the next mayor that came in, Ed Martin, was likewise a retired Air Force colonel. He then began a pretty vigorous campaign to begin acquiring easements and running water mains and sewer mains out into the undeveloped
This plant
areas.
was a big capacity facility, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And in fact, it tripled in capacity during the Johnson administration. And then Mayor Walker was able to then begin annexing property and providing utilities and negotiating deals with developers and builders and those kind of things. So it was interesting to see how it all kind of played out.
If my memory is correct, yeah, wasn't there a rule like if you ran sewage service to a certain development way out somewhere, that they did have to come, if they were required eventually to come into the city, weren't they?
Yeah, we've been very aggressive about annexation.
But it wasn't aggressive all the time. I mean, Walker really pushed that issue, didn't he?
He really pushed the issue, and I think he probably negotiated more with property owners and developers than had previously been done. So he was pretty big on enticements to get property owners because he believed expanding the tax base, the property or ad valorem tax base, was going to ultimately benefit all the citizens of the city.
There were a lot of empty holes in the city. I mean, I don't know what you call them, but
So in my world, we call those islands.
yeah, the islands. Yeah,
So those are areas of unincorporated property
they were really in the county, but
that
not
are in the
city.
county that are surrounded by property in the city. And in fact, state law now doesn't allow the creation of those, and so we have to annex in a manner that doesn't create new islands. But if you look at a map of Warner Robins, there are like a lot of big gaps of areas that are not part of the city of Warner Robins. So it's, if you didn't have 911 like we all do in today's world, it would be a real difficult task for public safety to know, who was to call on a particular house. Is that a county property or is that a city property? But of course, 911 makes that easier.
You have Warner Robins, and then across the street there's Centerville.
Centerville.
What's the city's relationship legally with Centerville?
Well, so certainly they're an independent city, have their own administration and all the various functions of city government. They do purchase certain utility services from Warner Robins, and so we believe that Warner Robins has aided Centerville in growing over the years, because to get into the things such as wastewater treatment is prohibitively expensive in today's world to begin a new one almost. So we've been in a position to help them grow by providing services for which they pay for from Warner Robins. Byron as well. Byron purchases a pretty good bit of wastewater services from Warner Robins.
What about to the south between Warner Robins and Perry?
Well, not so much so. There are some areas down there that are served by Warner Robins, and over the years, Perry's made some northern extensions.
Before Warner Robins gets it.
I think that was kind of part of the thought process on some people's parts, but so there still are areas in between the two that are not currently served, but you'd be surprised if you saw some of the most current maps that area is quickly getting developed either by Perry or by Warner Robins.
Do you see Warner Robins growing yet?
I think it will continue to, yeah. And there's some interesting conversations taking place now with regard to, again, increasing capacity at certain utility facilities or maybe even constructing a new one. So, everyone believes that the growth will continue and there's going to be continued and increased need for services.
Also, you cross county lines down there too, don't you?
That's right. So Warner Robins expanded into Peach County maybe 20 years ago. We have not a lot of property that's in the city limits of Warner Robins today, but there are some areas that Warner Robins is eligible to serve, and I think as those properties develop, they will be incorporated into the city.
You were talking about the sewage system, and how is the base served? Do they have their own system over there?
They have an independent system now. Over the years, I don't profess to be a utility attorney or expert, but there have been discussions about perhaps the city operating the system for the base or connecting their system to the city's system. That really hasn't happened yet, but so they currently provide their own services.
From time to time, I know you go out of town to help other communities because you've been around long enough where people know you and know how you deal with things. What are some of the things you've done over the years to help other communities?
Well, I talked about annexation a minute ago, and so there's some conception out there that I'm an expert on annexation. In fact, one of my friends jokingly says where Macon has a cherry blossom festival, Warner Robins should have the annexation festival because we've done so much of that over the years. So I do consult with a lot of cities and a lot of city attorneys and sometimes elected officials on annexation kind of issues, and then just other things in general. Again, when you've been in a specific kind of narrow discipline for a long time, you develop an expertise that some attorneys just don't have the luxury of ever learning because they don't do that exclusively for a very long period.
I don't know if I can ask you this, but if you can't talk about it, I'll understand. But you were going up to Morrow for a while. What was that? What was
so? One thing I've done in my career that's been kind of interesting is I've been hired by several communities to get involved with ethics matters. In Morrow, there was a move to, well, it was actually a process to remove one of their city council members for violation of various provisions of their city charter. I was involved in that. I've been involved with the City of McDonough Ethics Board in response to some charges brought against a couple of their council members. I do some work for Clayton County in that regard, and I've done some work for Doraville. So it's been kind of an interesting experience. And it's always advantageous, I think, for any of those kind of groups to have someone from outside to come in, because, you know, I go to these communities and I don't know the politics, and I don't need to know the politics, and so
They don't want you to know.
They don't want me to know the politics, and so you can give kind of unfettered and unbiased advice on those kind of things. And if toes are stepped on, don't care. You know,
What do they want you to do? Be kind of a judge or something, or?
You know, just in different circumstances. I mean, you know, in some of those governments that I talked about, I will provide legal advice to this ethics committee or board or something as they're considering a complaint filed against an elected official, and really help them determine whether the complaint has any merit or doesn't really rise to the level of a violation of the ordinance.
And over the years, you've been a friend of Nancy Grace, who had the TV program up there, and I know you traveled up there a few times to appear on her program. What was that like with her?
Challenging. Nancy's a nice person, but Nancy's pretty intense. Yeah. And she wants an answer to a question, and she wants it like that. And so you have to be on your toes when you're on her show. But it was always a lot of fun. She was very nice to me. Because I represented governmental officials and law enforcement, I was typically on her side, as opposed to defense lawyers who would be arguing against her. And that was always fun.
I want to talk about your family. Your family's 4 members in the immediate family, and they spread out everywhere. I'm the grandfather to the dog and the cat when you all were out of town. Now, Michelle's with the University of Georgia.
That's right.
And what type of stuff does she do with them?
So she works in their public service and outreach division of the university, and she's, I think, considered public service faculty. So her program, if I can quickly say, they help provide communities around Georgia with resources from the university, such as public health issues, historic preservation, landscape architecture.
A lot of things that you're involved in, really.
A little bit, yeah.
But the big rub here is Jim's a huge Georgia Tech guy, and Michelle's working for the University of Georgia. Yeah. How does that cut?
Oh, well, she likes to give me a hard time about it, but I don't take anything from
Paycheck's
it.
good, though. It
That's
kind of does a living.
Don't argue with that.
My 2 grandsons, we got Jay, who's building buildings in Atlanta. He's just finishing up on a 25-story building up
That's
there.
Right.
He worked for what kind of?
He works for a big construction company, and they've been involved in a big new office tower and grocery store development.
We're all proud of Jay. And then Mark just graduated from Georgia College.
That's right.
And he's doing what now?
So he's working for Senator David Perdue, another one of our Houston County natives. And so he's working in Senator Perdue's Senate office in Atlanta and fielding calls from constituents and doing just a variety of things. But he's got the political bug, it seems, so he seems to be real happy doing it.
And during his senior year, he was a Middle Georgia coordinator for the governor.
For Governor Brian Kemp's campaign. Yeah, that's right. In fact, we had to keep reminding him that graduating was the first priority and campaigning was the second priority, but he had a great opportunity. I mean, to be 21 years old and sort of be a regional director like that was a great opportunity for him.
Well, I can tell you I'm proud of every one of you, Jim, and you've led the way with them.
Thank you
for what you've done for the community and everything.
Thank you. I'm honored for you to say that. An honor to be here today.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ron Wildman in for Mayor Ellis on Middle Georgia Spotlight with Jim Elliott.